So we got one from earlier. I promised them that we'd jump on this one. And this one is Linden, Michigan. Son is he's in '08 on a decent Tier 2 team, which is ending soon. He wants to play juniors to prep for college. What is our next course, our next step? Well, right off the bat, Mike, this is right up your alley. Mike might be one of the best U18 coaches right now out there on getting players from Tier 2 into junior levels.
I coach here in Chicago. At our club, we actually try to identify how many kids want to play juniors. And throughout the whole year, we're not only developing them for junior hockey, because it is much different, especially coming from Tier 2, but then we're also connecting them with a bunch of options outside of, where I physically coach, or I should say scout, and I'm the director of player personnel within the NA. We obviously have an NA3 program, but I can't have all of my kids going to that program. So it's my responsibility to make sure, my kids have options and they get to decide what's the best choice for them and whatnot. So as a coach, I'm doing a lot of that for them to kind of help them out, because they have no idea. They don't know any of these junior leagues. So this is an '08. So that would be a Bantam major currently. So still very early when it comes to this whole process, but you're trying to find out the best route or path at the exact right time. I don't get too focused in on the double A aspect of it. It's just where within the double A level is your team and him as a player. But I would start getting him introduced to some of those different showcases or camps, just to kind of see as a measuring stick where he is compared to the other players that are out there.
Everything Mike was talking about right there was really focused on getting you into juniors at an entry-level junior. In other words, it's going to get you to NA3HL, USPHL Elite, USPHL Premier, maybe the EHL. If you hear people say they'll find you, I'm going to tell you right now, you've got a director of one of the best NAHL teams that just told you how it works. And I guarantee you, when he walks in the doors of a rink, he's not saying, show me where the last place AA team is. I want to watch their game. Okay, it doesn't happen. We go to showcases. What do we do first? We look at the top teams, and we scour the top teams first at showcases. You always want to be on the best possible team. Anybody that tells you, just go out and play, they'll find you, I'm going to ask you right away, who's looking? Okay, who's that they? There is no they out there looking for you unless you put yourself in a spot to be looked at. The second piece of advice on that is always, when you go to showcases from here on out, always make sure you reach out to teams that are historically at that showcase. So if I go to a showcase and I always know the Lone Star Brahmas are in the building for this showcase, I want to reach out to Lone Star. Why? Because they're going to have a list of guys they want to see. Then they'll take that email list of people that reached out to them, and they'll try to see as many of those players, if not all of the ones that reached out to them too. They might only watch you for 5 minutes, but they're going to try to watch you. And so you've already elevated yourself ahead of everybody else. Now, the last thing I have to say on this, and this is extremely important. If I'm watching a game, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm watching you. But here's the thing about that. Just because I'm there, I've got a list. So I want to see 5 and 18 and 7. So I'm lining everything up to try to see the guys I want. You might have 4 goals in that game, and I don't see any of your goals because I'm watching certain people on the ice. Now, if you reach out to me and get your name on a list, I'm going to give you the courtesy of watching it. At least I might see 1 or 2 of those goals, maybe all of them. Now, generally, when you go in and see a raw team you've never watched before, you're watching everybody. You got to get in the flow. But once I know that roster fairly well or who their studs are, I'm watching the guys I like, not their whole roster.
Yeah, that's good points. And just to kind of wrap up some of the other comments, I would say is I have kids that will come to me that I coach, and they'll say something like, hey, coach, what do I have to do to play in the USHL? And I had a kid ask me that at the end of in our exit meeting as a U16, he's playing AA hockey. And it's like, well, you're going to have to adjust your expectations, or you've got to get to AAA hockey right now. And when you get to AAA hockey, you've got to dominate it, even to be a consideration. because you're late in the game at this point to have that as an option.
Yep.
Even in the North American League at this point, coming from AA hockey, to your point, is impossible. It's just not a route that you can take.
Yep.
So when I talk to all of my players, it's more based on where you're at today. You're going to have to play tier 3 hockey. And from tier 3 hockey, you're going to have to dominate that level. And when you dominate that level, you can move on to the next level, which is the North American League. To the question that was asked as an 08, if he can make a AAA team, that's going to open up even more junior doors than where he's at today. So, and if he's not quite there yet for AAA hockey, then have him try to develop his skill set on and off the ice. Off ice at his age now is going to be so important, just like all the on ice development that you can get, and try to make a huge jump. So if he's in the middle of the pack of his current team as a AA player, well, when he comes back to tryouts next year, he's got to be one of the top players, or he's got to be pushing for a AAA spot. And if he doesn't make the AAA team, he's got to have the best AA season he can, and then continue that development, and then make it to, as a U16 player on a AAA team. And if you can do that, now the North American League is more of an option. You don't have to necessarily always only consider tier 3 teams. But at the end of the day, most of these AAA players are not going to the USHL, and they're not going to the North American League. So they'll still end up in tier 3 hockey. They just may be on the higher end of that league, and it takes them a little less to get the opportunity to move up to another league. So you really got to understand where your ability is, but now you got to really start putting in the work in order to make that more of a reality. And then now it's up to the player. If they don't go all in, or they don't want to go down that route, especially when it comes to the off ice or the extra on ice training, then they're selling themselves short. I'll give you one little analogy, and I heard it from an NHL player that I coached with for a couple of years. And he said to a parent, he said, if your son was trying to learn to play the guitar, and the only time they played the guitar is when they went to their lessons, how long do you think it would take them to be good at playing the guitar? If they didn't do anything at home, they didn't listen to music, they didn't become, a student of the game, or I should say a student of that instrument or music, how long would it take somebody to learn how to play the guitar if you're only doing it at the lessons? And that's kind of the translation of, if you're only showing up and following hockey and doing things to improve your development when you show up to practice.
Yeah, if you're playing AA and you're just status quo as far as what you're doing, you're never going to break out and be a good junior player. You can put up any sport, any player. There's no such thing as a late bloomer. No pun intended on your name, bloomer. There's no such thing as a late bloomer. There's a late grower, a kid that goes from 5'5" to 6'2", and there's a late worker. And let me explain that. Chicago Bulls, you're in Chicago. 3 guys on their world-famous team that won, how many world championships did they win at that time? They
6.
won 6, a couple back-to-back times. Michael Jordan got cut as a sophomore, and everybody's like, ooh, Michael Jordan got cut as a sophomore. He was a late bloomer, and he stuck with it. Bull. If Michael Jordan would have stayed at 5'9", like he did when he was a sophomore, and didn't have a growth spurt that put him up to 6'5", 6'6", he would have never been in the NBA. You would. That's a dime a dozen. He grew with all those skills he already had into a body that did it. Pippen, he was a team manager, and then he grew a foot. Okay, his skill level didn't get better. And if you look at the other guy there, Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman doesn't have any skill. So all he did was grew, okay? You can grow and put yourself into a spot to be an elite athlete. Happens all the time. You see it. If you saw Chara when Chara first came in the league, he was, what did he do? He worked his butt off. He was an average player that was almost 7 foot tall. And then he got into the weight room. He got in with a better skating instructor, and he built himself into something that was important. There is no late bloomer unless you work, just like Mike is saying. You've got to work 3 times harder than every other AA player if you want to make it from the AA level up into higher ends of junior hockey. Period.